the push towards te reo, there is suddenly these things go in cycles, and the universities have now laid off half their languages staff, and we're now going, oh yeah, but to trade and to learn and to get the synapses of our brains going, we all need to learn second languages. So yeah, if we actually start stopping, I mean, humanities, and you know, people who do humanities don't just end up as drunken poets. They do all kinds of things.
Well, I mean, also, I think
journalism, for example.
As a nation, we need people who think, who sit down and think, who spend a lot of time thinking,
Yeah.
who have forces that have shaped their thinking.
Yes.
And we can't just do that through engineering courses.
And actually knowing, you know, having what used to be called a good classical liberal education, you know, knowing history, knowing the classics, knowing, you know, the great books and the ideas that are in them and so forth, actually help us run as an economy as well as a country.
That is all very true, but if you're a young person today, steering that, you know, faced with what to study and knowing you've got to fork out thousands of dollars to do it, you'd go with what is seen to be a safe bet, wouldn't
Please,
you?
if you're a young person today and you don't know what to do, get a trade.
Yes, that's right.
Hey, high fives.
Infrastructure.
High fives. I can't get an upholsterer, you know?
I wasn't going to upholstery. See, that's interesting. I was thinking building the roads and the houses, and there are you just doing up your second-hand chairs.
I cannot get an upholsterer. That is actually
such a Greyland problem.
Water view, Tim. Thank you very much. Water view. But that's actually a good point you bring up, isn't it? I mean, gosh, we need our roof fixed. I called him. This is no lie. I called a builder on October. He's just getting to us in March.
Yep.
And he still can't do it.
And just don't try and get glass, because
Really?
you can't get glass doors put in. That's about it's 12-year waiting list.
Or try to get doors painted. Try and get a door
roofs.
painted at the moment.
Yeah.
Forget it.
Listen to us. Listen to us. There
These
you
are the
go.
first world
These are
problems to find, aren't they?
Well, my husband's in the trade and he's triple booked at the moment.
What
so
does- what
triple booked?
He's a plasterer.
Is
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And huge demand.
Yes.
Yeah.
Busy.
It's crazy.
And there is,
It's been crazy for years.
And this is the thing, right? There is actually some future proofing there. This is not stuff that's going to be that cyclical. This demand is going to last, given this immigration that we've got. This demand's going to be there for a while.
If you had your time again, Tim, would you be a plasterer or a tradie or
Mate, I would be hopeless. I really don't think the problem is I'm a journalist because there's not much else I can do. I can string some
humanities at
some
university,
words
didn't
together.
you?
I did. The romantic poets are my friends. Leave me alone. I can string words together. I couldn't build a. No.
Isn't it
useless.
interesting? So your husband just booked up, eh? That's symbolic of where the.
Yeah. I mean, it's all ebbs and flows. You know, he knows builders who suddenly have a big gap of 5 weeks or whatever, or the weather plays a part. The election last year played a part, actually, with the uncertainty about what would happen over there.
Hey, just final thoughts on breastfeeding. Got to mention this because the latest is a young woman who was at Pororua's North Shore shopping centre food court being told by a cleaner to go to the toilets to breastfeed her baby. Yes, it does come up. North Shore shopping centre has absolutely apologised, but breastfeeding in public,
yes,
it's fine.
Nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, it's fine. Look, like some people, just if you're offended, look the other way.
Yeah,
I was interested in the shopping centre. Said. You know, we welcome breastfeeding. And I thought, yeah, it's half your blooming market during the day, right? All your shoppers in the daytime are
but
breastfeeding
it sounds
mothers.
to me like a mistake. Maybe the cleaner thought, look, we have a facility for this, maybe you should go, you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't think these are bad people. It's just, you know, relax.
Alexia, Tim, you've been absolutely fantastic.
So have you, Wallace.
Have a great
Quite
Easter.
good.
See you.
Quite good replacement.
Thank you. Thank you. Daleks, not villains.
Ko te mai rā e hoa mai he kōrero kei te haere he kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Tonight on Checkpoint, a pilot flying above Waihi Beach says he's lucky to be alive and believes a drone is responsible for causing his light plane to crash yesterday. If so, this is a first in New Zealand and possibly the world. The Health Minister says the country's DHBs will need at least 14 billion over the next 10 years in catch-up capex. This all comes after the country's Manukau DHB revealed it has toxic mould, rot, asbestos, seismic issues in multiple buildings. And the Prime Minister meets the Maori King for the first time, plus 1,000 children gather to play the uke for Ed Sheeran in Dunedin.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina bat and aho. New Zealand spy agencies have been dragged into the debate over Russia, with Nationals suggesting in Parliament they're oblivious to what's happening in the rest of the world. Traditional allies like Canada, Australia and the United States have joined Britain in expelling Russian diplomats and spies in retaliation for the nerve agent attack in the United Kingdom. But the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, insists there are no Russian secret agents in New Zealand to expel. Nationals' Jerry Brownlee questioned the Minister for National Security and Intelligence, Winston Peters, about his previous reluctance to talk about potential spying activity.
Is the reason he declined to define Russian intelligence activity on the grounds, quote, it might potentially disclose the way our agencies operate, because our agencies are asleep and oblivious to what the rest of the free world appear to know?
I regard that as an absolute affront to an agency that he had some connection with just 5 months ago.
The Minister for National Security and Intelligence, Winston Peters. Meanwhile, British police say the Russian ex-spy and his daughter, suffering from nerve agent poisoning, most likely came into contact with the substance on the front door of their home in Salisbury. They say high concentrations of the deadly agent used against Sergei and Yulia Skripal have been found on the door. Police say the poison could have been smeared on the door handle. The Health Minister, David Clark, says he's expecting a report from the county's Manukau District Health Board setting out how it's going to sort out building issues at Middlemore Hospital. The Nurses Union says the situation with asbestos and mould at the hospital has staff very worried. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The basement of the maternity building is being monitored twice a week for airborne asbestos and the operating rooms once every 2 months. David Clark met the acting chair of the DHB today and says he'll have a report on the plan for dealing with it by Tuesday. He says the plan is intended to give the public and him confidence the board can handle the issues that are coming up, he says, seemingly by the day. Dr Clark says he's been assured by the DHB that there's no health and safety risk to the public. Atu i te whare pārimata, ko Chris Bramwell.
The Transport Minister is assuring motorists no one outside of Auckland will be hit with a regional fuel tax this term of government. Legislation introduced this week would allow a tax to be imposed anywhere in the country if a regional council makes the case. From July the 1st, Aucklanders will pay up to 10 cents extra a litre on petrol and diesel. But the Minister, Phil Twyford, says the legislation prevents regional councils outside of Auckland from seeking a fuel tax until 2021.
In the future, councils may want to take part of it, but we've been very clear publicly and directly to councils that this government will not be considering any other proposals for regional fuel taxes other than Auckland's in our first term of government.
Phil Twyford says he's already personally given that message to the mayors of Christchurch and Hamilton. The deal to build an America's Cup village in Auckland is complete after a unanimous vote by councillors. They backed the spending of nearly $100 million of ratepayers' money, with a slightly larger amount to be funded by the government. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Niall reports.
Councillors from the south and west urged Team New Zealand to try to ensure economic spin-offs for their communities. The team's Kevin Shoebridge says masts for several teams would be built in the west and a fleet of support boats by a firm in the south. There was little dissent, with nearly half of councillors either absent or silent. Plans for the cup-based layout will go to the Environment Court, and it's hoped approval will be given to start building late this year. I Tamaki Makoro, ko Todd Niall tēnei.
Thousands of Ed Sheeran fans travelling south today have clogged the main road between Christchurch and Dunedin. Up to 7,000 extra cars have been on State Highway 1, bringing some of the 37,000 concert goers to Dunedin for the first of his 3 shows in the city tonight. The road's been blocked during the day by several crashes, but emergency services say traffic is now back to normal. More heavy traffic is expected on the road again tomorrow, with concert goers returning home and more heading south for Sheeran's second show. Among fans gearing up for tonight will be one fan of the British singer who's going to every New Zealand show. Jasmine McLeish from Sydney has already seen Sheeran 15 times on his current world tour and says he's unique.
He's just got really great music, and the fact that he and just a guitar and a loop pedal can bring so many people into one place just blows my mind, and it's really great to watch every night. I don't think I'd ever get tired of seeing it. He's so great live, so good.
Jasmine McLeish says it's her 19th birthday today and it seems like a perfect way to celebrate. It's 5:05. Sport. The New Zealand cricket captain Kane Williamson says the Australian player David Warner is still a good bloke despite being banned from the sport for a year for ball tampering. Williamson contacted Warner in the wake of the scandal in the third test between Australia and South Africa that's led to Warner, skipper Steve Smith and Cameron Bancroft being suspended. Williamson was a teammate of Warner in the Indian Premier League and is not writing him off.
He's not a bad guy. They have made a mistake. They've certainly admitted that. And they are disappointed with that action. So they will, I suppose, have to take that punishment, a strong punishment that it is, and move on. And I guess you always learn from some tough lessons, and they will, I'm sure, be doing that. Two fantastic world-class players that made a mistake.
New Zealand begin their second test against England in Christchurch tomorrow, having a 1-0 lead into the two-match series. The New Zealand boxer Joseph Parker says he only needs one chance against Britain's Anthony Joshua when the two square off at Cardiff's Principality Stadium on Sunday morning in their heavyweight unification fight. Parker, the WBO champion, is unbeaten in 24 fights while Joshua is unbeaten in his 20 bouts. There are 4 heavyweight titles on the line and a potential shot at becoming the undisputed champion of the world. Parker is ranked 3rd in the world with Joshua on top and Deontay Wilder, the American who looms large for Sunday's winner, sandwiched between the pair. That's the news.
Super villains.
You can't run the tradition, the trust, the history, the spirit of cricket ragged and expect to get away with it.
Super bugs.
In a fight like this where you're competing against foes that evolve like way faster than we do, you need every bit of ammunition.
Superstars. I would describe it as unedifying.
You sound very excited about that.
Well, Giles is, aren't you, Giles?
Jubilated, I think is my word.
Super Radio, morning report with Guy Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then after 9, news as it happens. In-depth conversations with world-leading experts and the latest trends you need to know about. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after morning report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Fine spells and a few showers easing tomorrow. Waikato to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Occasional rain, clearing Taranaki this afternoon and elsewhere overnight. Mostly sunny tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay fine at first, occasional rain developing this evening, clearing and becoming fine again tomorrow morning. Whanganui to Wellington, also Wairarapa, fine and cloudy periods. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine or becoming fine this afternoon. Otago and Southland, fine with high cloud thickening tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, mainly fine, a few showers spreading north from tomorrow afternoon. For Yorkland, a few showers turning to periods of rain tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd shower tomorrow. It's 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for joining us. Coming up in a moment, the very large sum of money required to get DHBs up to where the Minister and the DHBs themselves think they should be. That is next, but we begin tonight with what may be an aviation first in New Zealand and almost a catastrophic one. A pilot on a sightseeing flight near Waihi Beach yesterday believes a collision with a drone was responsible for causing his plane to crash. Rod Vaughan was taking his son Richard for an aerial flight, flying at about 80 knots and at 1,600 feet when suddenly there was a loud bang, an explosion, and his plexiglass windscreen was gone. The rush of wind into the cabin blew his headset off, which disappeared, and as the air pushed into the plane at about 150 km, the side doors and windows were torn out as well. An emergency landing was required and Rod Vaughan managed to get the plane down in a fairly bumpy maize field with the plane rolling onto its roof and the pilot suffering a deep gash to his head.
I actually had trouble getting out of the plane because my eyes were full of blood and I couldn't see what I was doing. So anyway, I did get out and my son, who was Richard, who was very quick thinking, I gave him my mobile phone. He dashed off down the paddock and dialed 111 and eventually the emergency services turned up. They had trouble finding us because we were in the middle of a farmland and there were no sort of roads around us, just a few farm tracks. So it took them about 25 minutes or so to actually find us and come to our assistance.
And you are how sure that what hit you in flight in circumstances which were really imperiling and took your windscreen out, causing all that followed, was indeed a drone?
I'm fairly certain in my own mind, John, that it was, because the damage to the plexiglass is consistent with what I think a drone would do. There are basically 4 different scenarios that could have happened. We could have had a bird strike. Clearly that wasn't the case because we never saw a bird and there was no evidence of a bird strike in terms of feathers and bones and blood and stuff like that. So you can rule that out. The other possible scenario is a gunshot from a high-powered sort of rifle, but I think that's quite improbable. The other one would be a mid-air collision, which this wasn't, and the other one would be a drone collision. And if you look at the damage that was done to the plexiglass windscreen, in my view, it's consistent with a drone hitting us 90 degrees, sort of either coming from our left or our right, and sort of glancing off the windscreen and shearing it off and causing all the damage. And I'd have to say that there's a lot of drone activity around Waihi where we fly, and it has been an issue for a while, and likewise in nearby Thames, where there are a lot of, you could loosely describe them as cowboy operators. They go off to the warehouse or wherever and get a $90 drone and then fly them unsupervised and do all sorts of stupid things. And this is becoming a real issue, a major issue in the aviation world.
Rod, you sorry to interrupt, but you were in a single prop, were you?
Single engine, 2-seat plane. It was a light sport aircraft.
And so had the drone gone into your prop, which was what, a matter of just over a metre away from your windscreen, I suppose?
Yeah.
What would have happened?
Well, it would have sheared off the prop, in fact, and bits of the prop may well have flown off into the windscreen, but I doubt it. I think that would have been a better outcome, but it actually, whatever it was, and I think it was a drone, struck the windscreen and took most of it away. And then, of course, with all that air blowing in the front of the plane, it took out the doors and windows on either side, and of course a lot of drag, and we had to get down in a hurry. I think probably from start to finish, from the time we had the strike and the time we landed, it was probably no more than 30 seconds, so things had to happen.
Wow, yeah, it's
quickly.
fast.
Yeah.
One final question, and forgive my ignorance, and I'd like our listeners to forgive my ignorance too. I understand there are lots of rules around drone usage anywhere near an airstrip, and there are lots of rules around drone usage in terms of invading people's privacy and stuff. But out in the open, in a place like this, what are the rules around drone usage?
Well, I mean, there are height limitations and distance limitations and pretty basic stuff like that. But the regulations we have in this country are pretty limp compared to, say, the States. Well, I had a call from my son in New York today when he heard about it, and he said, well, Dad, this would never happen over here because basically you had to get some sort of pilot's license to operate a drone in the States, and there are all sorts of very stringent regulations. So we've really got to get our heads around it here because it could well be that what happened to me yesterday would have been the first drone to take out an aircraft in New Zealand and possibly anywhere else for that matter.
It's Rod Vaughan who survived the experience. Bad luck being hit by a drone. Good luck getting that plane down into the maize field. We'd love your feedback on this. Text us 2101. The Civil Aviation Authority is investigating the cause of the accident. Those of you who fly drones or those of you who are troubled by them, please do get in touch. We turn now to the country's district health boards. Last night, Checkpoint identified $4.3 billion of capital expenditure being sought by just 3 of the country's 20 DHBs, all 3 of whom say it won't add beds or increase capacity. This is catch-up spending, in other words. And at Middlemore, it involves getting staff and patients out of buildings that are rotting, mouldy, contain asbestos and are earthquake risks. We've also spoken to DHB CEOs and senior insiders who've told us of the pressure on them to deliver operating surpluses and to not advance business cases for money for capital development. Today, the Health Minister met the chair of the county's Manukau DHB to discuss the condition of its buildings and its books. And while the DHB assured the Minister there is no risk to public health and safety from the buildings, the cost of repairs and remediation and how long it will all take are uncertain. But the Minister and this government had pledged an extra $8 billion for Vote Health over 4 years. And I put it to the Minister this afternoon that $8 billion won't be enough.
No, that is not going to be enough, John. Absolutely right. I'm aware, and these are ropey numbers, so please take them in that context, but the best numbers we have at this stage are that it might be as much as $14 billion over the next 10 years that is required in infrastructure spending. That is no small sum. I don't think anybody would say
$14 billion over 10 years.
Yeah, and of course I want a better picture of that, and so I am requesting that a national asset management plan be set up. I think one of the most shocking things to me is to discover, as Minister, that there is no asset management plan in place for the New Zealand health system. Now, I think most small business people in New Zealand who had a business with a turnover of $1 million or $2 million or $10 million would have an asset management plan in place. At least they'd know where their assets are or what they are.
Absolutely.
In the health system, I'm afraid for political reasons or other reasons, historically that hasn't been true. And so I am going to request that work be done so that we can have a plan for asset management into the future. And I think it's a responsible thing to do. I think it's actually quite shocking that that hasn't been done previously.
Let's talk about that figure, $14 billion in 10 years, which is an extraordinarily large sum of money. And what we are hearing, what David Mates told us from the Canterbury DHB last night, what the Auckland DHB has told us, the Auckland DHB need about $980 million. And that's just one DHB. The Canterbury DHB, I think from memory, what was it, $1.6, $1.8 billion? And they're running to stand still. Canterbury is spending all that money and not getting any extra beds.
Yeah, John, I think they are large numbers and they are ropey numbers. So let's be clear on that. That's why we need some really solid work done around what the actual costs are likely to be and how to sequence them so that we can sort out associated workforce issues in the construction industry, so that we can have a pipeline of projects for infrastructure replacement. These are critical to New Zealand's future, these projects. They are about making sure we have a health system that delivers services to the public in a reliable way that New Zealanders would expect and deserve. They are a priority. So that's why I think that piece of work, actually quantifying the costs and the timeframes, is critical and will need to be done carefully and in a considered fashion. It won't be an overnight exercise. The health system is huge, and I would be surprised, actually, from what I've heard so far, if we even know where all those buildings are.
No, absolutely.
And so it's a big task.
It is a big task. Do you have the money?
John, at the moment, we'll deal with what's in front of us, and I think DHBs, will be frustrated they can't do everything at once, but they will also acknowledge that this government will be getting on with some of that stuff that has been a backlog for some time.
Why is there such a backlog? And the backlog has been so clearly signalled. I'm sitting in the Checkpoint studio with a table full of documents of DHB, even Treasury memos declaring, Treasury, quote, some DHBs look to be sweating their assets and underfunding repairs and maintenance to help balance their books. The county's Manukau DHB saying to their minister and their ministry in 2016, increasingly tough decisions have been made and will continue to be made, and there was pressure on them to make surpluses while they were making those decisions. What has been going on?
Well, in one sense, it's not mine to explain the actions of the previous government. But what I will say is that there is in a broad way, there's a political debate, a public debate.
Oh, we just seem to have lost that interview with the Minister. We'll try and come back to it. This is an absolutely fascinating discussion that we've been having on Checkpoint over the past couple of weeks, and that is the pressure on DHBs to run operating surpluses and also to sit on, sweat is the term that Treasury used, capital expenditure and money that was required but was not being sought in business cases because DHBs have told Checkpoint they were being told now is not the time. We will go back to that interview. It's a fascinating interview with David Clark that we did earlier this afternoon. We will re-queue and pick it up where we left off once we're able to do so.
90 minutes past 5. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. 4 countries collide on Sunday morning when the New Zealand-born boxer, proudly of Samoan descent, of course, Joseph Parker, meets English counterpart Anthony Joshua in Wales. The unification bout puts Parker's WBO world title and Joshua's WBA and IBF world belts up for grabs, and will be the second consecutive fight for the British star in Cardiff. Clay Wilson caught up with some of the locals at the pre-fight public workout this morning to gauge their excitement and get their predictions.
He may be English, but that doesn't mean one of the boxing world's biggest stars isn't a huge hit in the Welsh capital. Around 1,500 fans came to St David's Hall, a central Cardiff venue where theatre is the usual fare, to get a glimpse of the two men set to do battle in front of 80,000 at the Principality Stadium on Sunday. Joshua defended his belts at the same venue in October last year against Carlos Takam, a man Parker beat in 2016. And it appears another feverish atmosphere is in store.
Closed roof, awesome. 80,000 people shouting Joshua's name. It's crazy. Honestly, it's electric. It's so hot. You just sweat like hell. Takam fight was awesome, but this is a much bigger fight. 100 times bigger than the Takam fight, so it's going to be electric in there. The whole city's going to be buzzing. Already is.
While it's clear Joshua will be the overwhelming crowd favourite, Parker is clearly still admired in these parts. Cardiff artist and former boxer Patrick Killian had his impressive piece of artwork depicting the two fighters on display at the public workouts, and he believes the Kiwi won't have to put up with too much booing.
He seems a very nice guy. I don't think he's going to be hostile here at all. I think everybody's going to be really, they're going to love it, you know. I think you get a nice reception from the Cardiff crowd, I'm sure he will.
Killian's framed piece, which shows Parker and Joshua swinging punches towards each other, has a price tag of almost $17,000. He says all that's left is a final touch from the Kiwi side of the equation.
We just wanted to capture it for the event. Obviously we've got the flags in the background, we've got, it just creates a bit of atmosphere. Got it signed by Joshua. I'm sort of contemplating now whether to go and see if I can see Mr. Parker at his hotel.
With no charge to get into the event, many parents took the opportunity to bring their youngsters along to see two of the world's best close up. Although almost all of the excited kids were there for Joshua, some proved the man he is facing was not a complete unknown.
Joseph Parker. All I know is his name's Joseph Parker.
Do you know where he's from?
Auckland, New Zealand.
Several punters also displayed their knowledge of just who Parker is and what he brings to the table. One has been so impressed he has decided to part with some of his hard-earned wages in hope of an upset result.
Joshua drops him in the second round. Joseph Parker finishes him off in the 8th. And I'm going to celebrate because I'm going to be £550 up off my back. Come on, Parker! Ooh-ah.
There is no doubt, however, who will get the loudest cheers. And there is no doubt whose name was left ringing around an arena of people, all buzzing for a huge bout. For Checkpoint in Cardiff, Clay Wilson.
23 minutes past 5. The Crown says DNA belonging to a member of New Zealand's embassy staff in Washington, D.C. was found inside a camera, and he's been charged with attempting to make an intimate visual recording. Because the incident is said to have happened inside the New Zealand embassy, it's treated as New Zealand soil, and the case is being heard in Auckland. Our Auckland court reporter Edward Gay has been covering the case and joins us now. Lots of suppressions here, Edward, so I'm going to play it safe with my questioning. Name suppression, first and foremost?
That's right. Graham Newell, the man's lawyer, said that the sole issue at this man's trial will be identity, and he said having his client named could actually jeopardise his client's right to a fair trial. He said if witnesses come forward, they could be influenced if his client was named beforehand. But the Crown prosecutor, Brian Dickey, said he couldn't follow that argument. He said that the offending happened in the New Zealand Embassy in Washington. There's been a full investigation by the police, meaning the police have already spoken to a number of witnesses. Mr. Dickey said the case turns on this crucial evidence of the DNA being found inside the camera on this data card. He said that Mr. Newell's argument about negative effects on friends and family as well, that didn't meet the criteria under the legislation.
So who did the judge agree with, Edward?
Well, Judge Kevin Glubb came down on the side of the Crown. He said there was no independent evidence about the court from in front of the court. Naming the man would have any out of the ordinary effects on his friends and family. In relation to the man's fair trial rights, Judge Glubb said he also he wasn't entirely sure about this argument either. He said there were no eyewitnesses to the alleged offending, that the case turns on this DNA evidence. And Judge Glubb said he couldn't see how the man's identity could be an issue, and he declined actually to continue the suppression order. However, as soon as he delivered that judgment, Graham Newell shot up on his feet again. He said he'd be appealing the decision, and that effectively meant Judge Glubb has to continue the suppression to effectively allow the appeal to take place.
Right. The crucial detail is the man whose name has been suppressed has pleaded not guilty, right?
He has. He's pleaded. Mr. Newell actually made that plea today on behalf of his client. He also was pressed to choose between trial judge alone or trial by jury. He went trial by jury. And this case is due back in court in July.
Edward Gay, thank you very much indeed, as always, Eddie. Dunedin has become Dun-Ed-in as the first of more than 100,000 Ed Sheeran fans. Goodness gracious me, pour into the city. Sheeran, who's one of the world's biggest pop stars right now, plays the first of 3 gigs at Dunedin's covered stadium tonight, and the city seems to be gripped in Ed fever. Our Otago Southern reporter Ian Telfer is with us via live view from the Octagon. How are you, Ian? What's happening?
Oh, g'day, John. Everything's happening. We've got hundreds of people down here gearing up for this exciting big night. Dunedin really hasn't seen anything like this for many years, and you can see that the city is trying to make the absolute most of it. Today we've had ukulele bands. There's 1,000 kids with ukuleles playing in the middle of here at the centre of Dunedin in the Octagon. Now there's AstroTurf lined out, people enjoying a beer, getting ready for the concert, and merchandise on sale, food vans, it's all happening.
Yeah, it looks like a glorious evening too, and there are people from far and wide, right? The city's population will have swollen.
That's right, and in an extreme way, John. Over this weekend, we're expecting more than 100,000 visitors, and the population of Dunedin is only 130,000. So you can imagine that it's almost the city's population doubled coming into the city for this one, this one weekend for these 3 concerts that Ed Sheeran's giving down at the Forsyth Bay Stadium. So it is a very big deal, and for that reason, the city's been rolling out everything it can think of. It's hung lanterns here. It's organised. It had an Ed Sheeran governance committee even for the city. It's done everything it can think of to sort out the liquor laws, the trading issues, the accommodation, everything, just so that this is a success. They're desperate to make it a memorable one and a winner for the city.
So you're bang in the middle of the city there. What's happening at the stadium itself? But I guess there will be seats there because it's a sports stadium, but there will also be a mosh pit and standing room. So were there eager people queuing up to get as close to the stage as possible?
Oh, that's right, John. Earlier today, there were people queuing up. In fact, they were there from last night. They camped overnight, 40 of them or so. Were there by 7 o'clock this morning. We got down there and we were talking to them this morning. Some of them had travelled from Tauranga. They'd travelled from overseas. One woman we talked to came from Sydney. She had been to 15 of his concerts already on this world tour. She's going to every New Zealand tour and every New Zealand concert. And it's her birthday today, for her 19th birthday. So, there's one happy young woman. And there are a lot of people with a story to tell like that. Ed Sheeran fans seem to not just be passionate, they seem to be absolutely in the grip of this guy. And he seems to be able to work his magic and just to give them the time that they've been hoping for. So everyone, I think, here is hoping that this goes well and that people, have a good time. In years to time, think, Dunedin, Ed Sheeran, it was the time of our lives.
Are you going, Ian Telfer?
I'm not. I'm the only one in Dunedin not going, John. But I didn't realise how big the thing this was, and by the time I thought about it, gosh, it was too late. But listen, you talk to people on the streets, you taxi drivers, the people all around you, anywhere you go, people will say they're gearing up for this. They're going tonight, tomorrow night, on the weekend. People have moved out of their homes so that other people can move in. because accommodation's been so tight, or they're billeting friends and family. You know, everyone's affected, and most people are positive about it. You know, there's a few people who are saying, gosh, it's ruined our city with the transport or the traffic, or what's the fuss about the red-haired man from England? But look, most people are just trying to get in the groove and enjoy this for what it is.
Ian Telfer, this is your last day with Radio New Zealand, isn't it? This is it. Is this you finishing tonight?
Yeah, that's right, John. Yeah, 10 years and time to hang up the mic for a bit, but it's been a great ride. So,
well, Ian, I just want to say thanks on behalf of RNZ, because it's really hard working in a bureau, because when it happens, everyone wants it now. And if it happens again the next day and the following day and the following day, your phone rings and you just get sent out again. And you've done a fantastic job from Dunedin on behalf of that city and on behalf of the rest of the country who's found out so much about what's been happening there. And not only in Dunedin, Central Otago, across to Queenstown, over to Invercargill, you've covered it all and you've done it brilliantly. So on behalf of us all, thanks for wonderful work, Ian, and we wish you really well.
Thank you, John. Yeah, it's been a great experience for me too, and I thank everyone who's given me the help along the way. So, all the best.
Ian Telfer, our outgoing Otago reporter, joining us live from a city abuzz with Sharon fever. It is 5:30. Coming up on Checkpoint, the Prime Minister meets the Maori King for the first time. The maximum penalty handed down to Auckland business owners flouting building safety laws in the past 4 years has been just $1,000. And British police believe they're getting closer to establishing how Sergei Skripal and his daughter were poisoned. We would love your feedback, and we're getting a bit of it on drones. Text us 2101. Don't forget, we're also on Twitter and Facebook, and our email address is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. It is 28 and a half minutes to 6, which feels like a perfect time. Katrina Batten for the headlines.
It really is. New Zealand spy agencies have been accused of being asleep and oblivious to the reality of Russian agents in New Zealand. National's Jerry Brownlee says that may be the reason the Minister for National Security and Intelligence, Winston Peters, is reluctant to talk about potential spying activity. The government has been under pressure over its lack of action against Russia following the nerve agent poisoning of a former Russian spy and his daughter in England. Meanwhile, the front door of a Salisbury house is most probably where the pair came into contact with the substance. British police say high concentrations of the deadly agent used against Sergei and Yulia Skripal have been found on the door of their house, and it could have been smeared on the door handle. Thousands of Ed Sheeran fans travelling south today have clogged the main road between Christchurch and Dunedin. Up to 7,000 extra cars have been on State Highway 1, bringing some of the 37,000 concert goers to Dunedin for the first of his 3 shows. The road's been blocked during the day by several crashes, and more heavy traffic is expected tomorrow, with concert goers returning home and more heading south for Sheeran's second show. The Transport Minister is assuring motorists no one outside of Auckland will be hit with a regional fuel tax this term of government. Legislation introduced this week would allow a tax to be imposed anywhere in the country if a regional council makes the case. Aucklanders will soon pay up to 10 cents extra a litre on petrol and diesel, but the Minister Phil Twyford says any new law won't expand the tax to other areas until 2021. Auckland councillors have backed the plan to build an America's Cup village on the waterfront. They voted unanimously in favour of the $212 million deal, of which the council will pay nearly half. The plan extends Hobson Wharf and builds up to 5 bases on Wynyard Point, with Team New Zealand housed in the existing event centre. Team New Zealand says it will put them in a strong position to defend the old mug. It is, that's the headlines. It's coming up to 20, look, I'm going to give the time for you, 26 minutes to 6, and I'll be back at 6 o'clock in 26 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Let's turn to business news now with Emile Donovan, who beams in from Wellington. Hi, Emile, with a very nice shirt on. Employment confidence. Every day we get a new survey, and they're up and down like a yo-yo, but employment confidence has risen to the highest level in a decade.
Yeah, that's right. It's the highest level since before the global financial crisis. Pretty big deal, really. This comes from Westpac and McDermott Miller. It's their quarterly employment confidence index. It's risen 2 points. It's up to 115.9, and any reading over 100 signals more optimists than pessimists. Now, when we delve into specifics, there's actually some pretty interesting stuff that comes out of here. There's a lot of confidence from workers that their wages are going to rise in the near future. That, of course, you'd imagine anyway, is influenced by the impending rise of the minimum wage. But on the flip side, there's less confidence in the number of job opportunities available, both now and into the future. Now, that's actually not too surprising, considering unemployment's fallen to what I think is a 9-year low, and those two metrics tend to tango in tandem, according to Westpac. So, yeah, overall, what does this really tell us? Well, from an employment perspective, it's really that things are getting back to normal, properly back to normal, after the global financial crisis, which seems like a long time ago, and it was a long time ago, but I suppose it really speaks to what a colossal event that really was and continues to be, I suppose.
Thanks, Emil. A good half year for clothing retailers, Hallensteins and Glassons. What Hallensteins and Glassons, or Hallensteins Glassons? What's? Can you explain that to me, Emil?
Yeah. So Hallenstein Glassons is actually the company name. They own both of those retailers. They have made a serious profit this year, a touch over $15 million. That is nearly 2/3, an increase of nearly 2/3 on the first half of last year. Now, the company did expect that increase. It's putting it down to improved sales and better margins. And they've also focused massively on their online sales. These are now growing faster than sales in their brick and mortar stores. We spoke to their chief executive, Mark Goddard, earlier today. He says the company's tried to be more forward-thinking, both in terms of what it's getting on the shelves and in terms of how it's marketing that.
If you listen to the weather forecast, they talk about a warmer start to winter than normal. I think the result has come as a result of the way that we have approached bringing new and fashion and product to market, and the way that we've focused our attention on the digital communication and engagement.
And Hallenstein stocks closed up by about 3%, which is really pretty good considering the market was down overall. And just finally, a reminder that on Sunday, the minimum wage is going to go up by 75 cents to $16.50 an hour. Now, I thought that would be good news for the waiters and waitresses of Dunedin who'd be earning time and a half on that, but actually Easter Sunday isn't a public holiday. It's Easter Monday that's the public holiday, so that's just ruined my segue, John.
So $16.50 an hour is what it's going up to, up 75 cents, right, from Sunday on?
That's right, from Sunday onwards.
Thanks, Emil. How did the markets end the week?
Well, the NZX 50 is down 69 points. That's about 0.8%. It closed on 8319. The dollar's down slightly against the major currencies. It's buying 72 US cents, 93.9 Australian and 51 pence.
Emil Donovan, have a wonderful weekend. Thanks so much for your work this week. Emil, let's go to the weather now with a long weekend ahead for many of us. Goodness gracious me, Mid-Service meteorologist John Law is beaming in from Wellington. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora. Heading in towards the long weekend, we have got some pretty decent weather for many of us. To start things off though, on Friday we will find a few showers still lingering across the likes of Auckland, but there are going to be some good breaks between them, and it's still pretty warm. Highs there 23 degrees Celsius. As we go down towards the rest of the Northland, there's plenty of dry weather in place. A bit more cloud from time to time, but really not a bad looking start to that long weekend. Good Friday turned out to be a pretty dry and fine one for many of us. Down in towards Wellington, it's a very similar sort of story. There's a bit more cloud from time to time, but generally dry. Highs around about 21 degrees Celsius and a fine looking start to that long weekend. And that situation is pretty much reflected across most of the Northland, just those showers lingering across the far northern parts. As we head down towards the Southland, there's plenty more sunshine to come, and it's a fine looking day out in Christchurch as well. A little bit of a cool start today. Temperatures around about 8 degrees Celsius to start the day, but highs are back to about 20 degrees Celsius. And for many of us on the Southland, there's plenty of dry weather. The best of the sunshine up towards Nelson and Marlborough, and highs here 20 to about 23 degrees Celsius. Perhaps an isolated shower out towards Greymouth and up in towards Buller, but for many places it's set to stay dry throughout the daytime, just areas of cloud to watch out for. And that's it from me.
Thank you, John. Have a fantastic Easter. Any political differences have been set aside as the Prime Minister and the Maori King met for the first time in Narua Wahia. King Tuhetia had given his support to the Maori Party last year, but says through a spokesman the people have spoken and he wants to support the government to do its work. Jacinda Ardern received a very warm welcome, complete with baby jokes, and talk about the beauty of the Waikato region, but there was still plenty of politics at play. Rowan Quinn was at Turanga Waiwai Marae.
A challenge to start for the warmest of welcomes for the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Last year, King Tuhetia threw his support behind the Maori Party, but today it was clear he was more than happy to welcome Ms Ardern. She was brought onto the marae by his daughter Ngā Wai Honoi Te Pō, and they sat together at the front of the wharenui. Both Ms Ardern and those welcoming her spoke of her strong connection to the Waikato, describing today as a type of homecoming. She said later it was a great honour.
It was my first time in that whare, and that is unlike any whare I've stepped into before, because of course it's home to a number of historical treasures and taonga, and so the chance to have the King talk me through all of those was wonderful.
But politics was still a big part of the day, with 4 of Ms Ardern's ministers there with her. Rahui Papa, the Kingitangi spokesman and former Maori Party candidate, says there's much to be done to help Maori, and the King wants to work with the government no matter which party they come from.
It's about how can we devise really robust programs and robust policies that it doesn't matter who's in government, that they actually get on and do the job. That's the main whakaaro, or the main thought that is in the Kingitangi.
In a speech delivered to Ms Ardern through a representative because of protocol, the King called for a new cross-party group of MPs that would be tasked with listening to ordinary Māori about what they need. And he suggested a new form of housing for Māori prison inmates based on a traditional model to help rehabilitate them, saying he'd donate a $3 million piece of land to build it on. Jacinda Ardern said some work along those lines had already begun.
I think the foundation for our relationship is strong, and the meeting today proved to me that we have so much that we are absolutely jointly focused on working on, and a real intent there to work on that together.
During the speeches, Ms Ardern joked that the iwi had not yet offered her a baby name, like many prophet around the country, adding that she loved the interest people took. In return, Mr Papa said they would think about one and get back to her. I Ngārua Wahia mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
18-6. Over the past 4 years, the maximum penalty handed down to Auckland business owners who flouted building safety laws has been, wait for it, $1,000. The Auckland Council and the building compliance industry both say the penalties are too low, while fire safety experts warn it's just a matter of time before the city has an incident similar to the shopping fire in Russia this week that killed 64 people. Zach Fleming investigates.
The average fine for an Aucklander who refuses to make sure their building is safe is just $453, or 0.23% of the maximum fine possible. And that's usually after months or even years of threats from Auckland Council.
I don't think that's good enough at all. I think that's a very weak approach.
Rosie Killip, the Director of Building Networks, who describes herself as
New Zealand's leading authority on building compliance,
says Auckland Council and Auckland's judges need to be harsher on bad building owners. The council prosecutes as an absolute last resort. Take the Skyworld building, for example, which Checkpoint has covered extensively. It didn't have a legitimate warrant for years and had an extensive list of fire safety issues, yet its owner, James Quack, was never prosecuted or fined. Maybe because Auckland Council avoids court, because of the weak penalties handed down. GM of Building Consents Ian McCormick says most owners cooperate.
But there's a small proportion of folk who, don't, and when you consider for us the amount of work that's gone into try and avoid having to get taking legal action, we would certainly encourage, I guess, more substantive penalties in this area.
The penalties are about as low as they can go. The maximum a judge could impose is a fine of $200,000 and then $20,000 for every day the building's not compliant after that. But over the past 4 years, of the 29 people Auckland councils tried to prosecute, 7 were discharged without a conviction, and the maximum penalty handed down was a measly $1,000 fine. And remember, this is after council has exhausted every other avenue of trying to get the owner to cooperate.
If we had some significant penalties to be able to, make them aware of, I think we'd get compliance from people more rapidly.
We wanted to know what the high end of offending was, what would warrant a $1,000 fine. But Auckland Council redacted all personal information from the prosecution list it gave Checkpoint. The Chief Judge of the District Court declined to comment for this story. Her office said it would be constitutionally improper to talk about prosecutorial discretion. Checkpoint wasn't able to find anyone in the justice system who'd talk about penalties and whether they're enough. Rosie Killip says it's not just judges though. She says council needs to be harsher on owners too.
It is expensive to put together briefs of evidence and to go down the prosecution route. The infringement regime was supposed to mitigate that, and again, it seems at a very high level it is a system that most councils don't want to put in place.
Combined, she says Auckland's literally playing with fire.
On the ground, and the front line of people who do this kind of checking of fire alarm systems, sprinklers and so forth, they tell me it's a matter of time.
A matter of time before we have a disastrous fire on the level of London's Grenfell Tower blaze, for example, which killed 71 people. Here's fire safety expert Ron Green talking to RNZ last year after that fire.
We can't keep doing what we're doing, otherwise we could have a disaster and then things will change, but we don't want to do that. We want things to change before we have a disaster.
We all work, live, play in buildings in a pretty complacent mindset. Start bleating about it, Instagram it, put it out there and start talking about these issues.
Before it's too late. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
The National Party is suggesting New Zealand's spy agencies are asleep and oblivious to the reality of Russian agents in New Zealand. Amid an international chorus of rebuke for the Kremlin in the wake of the nerve agent attack in England on a former Russian spy and his daughter, the government here has come under fire for a perceived lack of action. New Zealand is still the only member of the Five Eyes spying alliance not to have taken action against Russia, because Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says there are no undeclared Russian agents here. But she has just announced that New Zealand will impose travel restrictions on individuals expelled by other countries, with the names placed on a travel ban list. Political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
New Zealand's traditional allies like Canada, Australia and the United States have joined Britain in expelling Russian diplomats and spies in retaliation for the nerve agent attack. But the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern insists there are no Russian secret agents in New Zealand to expel. In Parliament today, National's Jerry Brownlee asked the Minister for the Security Intelligence Service about Russian spying activity in New Zealand.
Does he agree with the Right Honourable Winston Peters, who said in the House yesterday that, quote, New Zealand Security Intelligence Service advises it's aware of Russian intelligence activity in New Zealand and where it's seen as appropriate action will be taken? If so, what is that action?
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
On behalf of the Minister for the NZSIS, yes, the member is well aware of the long-standing precedent in this House that we do not discuss intelligence operational matters. It is not in the public interest to more fully address the member's question, except to say that I have confidence in the NZSIS and the government has a range of powers at its disposal to protect our country and its people, and we will use them when it's appropriate to do so.
Mr Brownlee continued.
Is the reason he declined to define Russian intelligence activity on the grounds, quote, it might potentially disclose the way our agencies operate, because our agencies are asleep and oblivious to what the rest of the free world appear to know?
Mr Speaker, I regard that as an absolute affront to an agency that he had some connection with just 5 months ago. And if this country was the subject of that sort of intelligence activity, why on earth didn't he and the Foreign Minister take charge of it back then, rather than making the story up now?
Mr Brownlee also asked if New Zealand had received any congratulatory messages from its Five Eyes partners for the way it was handling the Russia issue.
Can I say on behalf of the Minister that he and his Cabinet colleagues and the Prime Minister have been the recipients of enormous praise from our Five Eyes partners and people all over the world, including a conversation I had with the UK High Commissioner this morning.
National's Todd McClay also pressed Winston Peters on Russian espionage, and Mr Peters appeared to delight everyone but the Speaker with his response.
For how long has he been aware of Russian intelligence activity in New Zealand?
Since I was a young boy.
Order.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
Meanwhile, British police believe they are getting closer, it's been a bit of trial and error, to establishing how Sergei Skripal and his daughter were poisoned. The ABC's Nick Grimm with the latest from London.
In a statement, Scotland Yard said the highest concentration of the nerve agent yet found had been discovered on the door of the Skripal home. The Senior National Coordinator for Counter-Terrorism Policing, Deputy Assistant Commissioner Dean Hayden, telling the media that
at this point in our investigation, we believe the Skripals first came into contact with the nerve agent from their front door. We are therefore focusing much of our efforts in and around their address.
And police are advising Salisbury's residents that their officers are likely to remain in the area for weeks and months ahead while the investigation continues. Britain has been outraged by what it calls the first known offensive use of a chemical weapon on European soil since World War II. The expulsion of 23 Russian diplomats by Britain has been followed in kind by 27 other Western countries, with a total of more than 100 other Russians getting their marching orders. British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson telling a gathering of foreign ambassadors in London that the Kremlin had badly underestimated how Britain's allies would respond to what happened in Salisbury.
Those countries that have acted know full well that they face the risk of retaliation. And frankly, there are countries that have taken action that are more vulnerable to Russia than we are in the United Kingdom, whether through geography or through their energy needs. And I pay tribute to them, and I thank them from the bottom of my heart.
And Boris Johnson reeled off a list of Russian provocations: the annexation of Crimea, the downing of MH17, cyber attacks, election interference, and the concealment and use of chemical weapons inside Syria. And then he said there was the response to this incident.
First, they told us that Novichok never existed. Then they told us that it did exist, but they had destroyed the stocks. Then they claimed that the stocks had escaped to Sweden, or the Czech Republic, or Slovakia, or the United States. And then they said that the attempted murder of Sergei and Yulia Skripal was revenge for Britain's supposed poisoning of Ivan the Terrible. What we did it to spoil the World Cup. In fact, the Foreign Office has so far counted 24 such ludicrous fibs, and I'm glad that 27 countries have stood up to say that they're not swallowing that nonsense anymore.
Moscow has denied involvement in the attack on the Skripals, directing suspicion instead at Britain's spy agencies, suggesting they deployed the Novichok nerve agent to frame Russia and stoke anti-Russian hysteria.
Nick Grimm with that report. To move over peak cow and peak oil, peak bee is here. Beekeepers are warning some in the industry are at risk of going bust because there are now too many hives. The jump in the popularity and price of Manuka honey in recent years has meant a boom in production. But now beekeepers say the country's gone past peak bees. Here's our deputy political editor on the Bee Round today, Chris Bramwell.
Parliament is holding an inquiry into honey, investigating a range of issues from the health of bees to the health of the industry itself. The president of Beekeeping New Zealand, Russell Berry, says beekeeping is not sustainable at the moment because of the high numbers of hives in New Zealand. He warned MPs at Parliament this morning that the situation was critical.
Particularly corporates in Manuka, they're overstocking spring areas, severely damaging the beehives in the traditional areas. Hawke's Bay last year, I think, probably averaged about 12 kilograms a hive. You can't carry on beekeeping in that. A lot of Waikato is down to about 12 kilograms a hive this year, and beekeepers are going to go broke. Some of the less efficient beekeepers are probably well on the way of doing it now.
Mr Berry says as the industry has become more profitable, the theft of hives has also become a serious problem.
When a beehive was worth only $10, well, nobody bothered stealing them. But when they're worth $1,000, obviously, and also they're more inclined to steal them, and also when they're committed to pay a landowner, say $500,000 to put beehives on their property, but they haven't got any beehives, they tend to go and borrow somebody else's.
Russell Berry also put the boot into the Ministry for Primary Industries and its record on keeping diseases like the Varroa bee mite out of the country.
We have little confidence that an incursion can be found in sufficient time to make eradication attempt viable for most exotic diseases, particularly if MPI is in control, as from past experience, the whole MPI system, and I'm not grounding in any individuals, is too slow to react.
Another threat to bee populations is the use of neonicotinoids, which are chemicals included in some pesticides. The chemicals are widely used in New Zealand, but the Environmental Protection Authority says they can't be sprayed when hives are being placed in orchards or bees are foraging nearby. Apiculture New Zealand represents about half of the country's hives. Its chief executive, Karen Koss, says it's very worried about the effect of the chemicals on bee populations.
So I would have to say that the international research now is showing us that that is an issue, and there's enough that warrants us to be concerned about it. We don't have any research on neonics, and that's something we absolutely need to do because it's tied to our reputation, it's tied to our bee health.
Karen Koss says it's time to have a look at the EPA standards around the chemical again.
It's an emerging international issue. It's not going to go away. We are actually not prepared just in terms of the research. We just don't have enough research about the situation here in New Zealand, and we're uncomfortable about that.
The Select Committee will continue to hear submissions next week. Atu te whare pāri mata mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Chris Bramwell.
One of New Zealand's largest specialist residential property managers has been slapped down by the Tenancy Tribunal for unlawfully charging tenants a letting fee. A group of 4 flatmates in Wellington took Quinovic to the tribunal after they were asked for large sums of money before they'd signed a tenancy agreement. Laura Dooney explains.
Wellington man Ben Knight and his 3 flatmates thought they'd secured the perfect flat nestled up in the hills of the Wellington suburb of Wilton. The house was first listed privately by the landlord, but then relisted through Quinovic as the landlord lives out of town and couldn't show potential tenants around. There were no plans for Quinovic to manage the property after that. Mr Knight and his friends were offered the flat in December last year, but then, he says, Quinovic started demanding money.
Straight away, Quinovic basically said we needed to pay a $1,000 deposit within 24 hours in order for them to go ahead with the tenancy. We thought it was a little bit strange, but we were really keen to get the place. It's really hard to find a place in Wellington at the moment. So we paid them a $1,000 deposit.
Mr Knight also claims Quinovic demanded a further $1,500 before the flat was theirs, but this payment was not considered as part of the hearing as there was no formal record of it. During the hearing, Quinovic confirmed the $759 letting fee was taken from the $1,000 deposit, as set out in an email sent a few days after it was paid. The tribunal ruled this was unlawful, as the letting fee was charged after the tenancy was granted, and there was no evidence a letting fee was part of the contract. Tenancy agreements must state if there is a letting fee. Mr Knight says unlike many people, he and his flatmates were lucky to be in a position where they could challenge Quinovic.
Even for us, it was a real effort. It would have been really easy to just let it slide. I guess the head of the company hanging up on you gives you some motivation to see it through and use the legal avenues available. So I'm really glad we did, even though it was a massive pain.
Ben Knight says the sector lacks regulation and fears property managers can take advantage of tenants and landlords. Housing researcher Dr. Lucy Talfa-Barnard agrees.
Anybody can be a property manager. Anyone can sign up to a property management firm with no real previous training or understanding and learn on the job or not learn at all.
But she says property managers do have their place.
Many of them do have their tenants' interests at heart. I used a property manager myself when I was living overseas, and they were fantastic, but landlords need to be very careful about who they use and making sure that they come with good recommendations.
Dr Lucy Telfer-Barnard says Housing Minister Phil Twyford's plan to get rid of letting fees is overdue. The Wilton landlord, Mark Roach, says he supported Mr Knight going to the tribunal.
I like to stand my ground when I've been aggrieved. I know Ben was pretty upset about it, and I said, well, don't just take it lying down. I think you should try and do something about it.
Quinnovic has been ordered to give the money back to the renters. Quinnovic Wellington's Chief Operating Officer Paul Chapman says it's standard practice to charge a letting fee after a tenant has passed the checks and been successful in getting a flat. He says he'll be following up on the tribunal's decision to see if there's anything to be learnt or that needs to be addressed. In Wellington, for Checkpoint, call Laura Dooney aho.
25 seconds before the news at 6. Bit of feedback coming in on Rod Vaughan and his plane crash with crash landing, which he survived, although with a nasty gash to his head. He says a drone hit them, took the windscreen out, then the air pressure came in and took the doors out, and next minute, a lot of people saying 1,600 feet is too high for a drone to be at. Thank you. We'll try and find out more about what drones can get to.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Bat in aho. New Zealand will ban Russians expelled by other countries over the Salisbury nerve agent attack from coming here. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand will be asking its security partners to provide their names. She says those names will then be placed on a travel ban list to ensure that individuals who have been found to undertake activities incompatible with their diplomatic status in other countries do not enter New Zealand. The move follows criticism by the National Party that New Zealand is the only member of the Five Eyes spying alliance not to have taken action against Russia over the attack in England. Ms Ardern says she'd contest any statement suggesting this country is doing nothing.
Not only have we made strong statements, joined our partners in calling for a response from Russia, we've also had the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have called in the Russian ambassador here in New Zealand. Like our other partners, we did seek out whether or not there were any undeclared intelligence officers in New Zealand, in the same way our partners had, and if we had them here, we would expel them.
Jacinda Ardern. British police say the poisoned Russian spy Sergei Skripal probably came into contact with a nerve agent at his home in Salisbury. Scotland Yard says the investigation is now focused on the property because the largest concentration of the nerve agent was found on the front door. Mr Skripal and his daughter remain in hospital in a critical condition 3 weeks after the attack. The BBC's Tom Simons has the latest.
Scotland Yard says that following detailed forensic and scientific analysis, the highest concentration of the Novichok substance has been found on the front door handle. Police will be stepping up their searches of the area around the house in the coming days, but say this is precautionary, the risk is low. Counter-terrorism officers have finished searching a number of other locations, a cemetery visited by the Skripals, the Maltings shopping area and a car pound. The decontamination process is expected to start next week.
Tom Simons in Salisbury. Traffic is flowing again between Christchurch and Dunedin. 3 crashes in the middle of the day caused delays for those heading to tonight's Ed Sheeran concert, the first of 3 being held in Dunedin over the long weekend. A third of the 120,000 fans attending the concerts are from Christchurch, with as many as 7,000 extra cars on the road each day as people head south. That's on top of the already busy holiday traffic. Janine Porter from the Christchurch Transport Operations Centre says it's been a busy day with lots of disruptions, but things are now starting to improve. But she says the next wave of Ed Sheeran fans is expected to hit the road tomorrow, causing further chaos. The Prime Minister has been warmly welcomed at Tūranga Waiwai Marae, her first visit to the home of the Maori King. Last year, King Tuheitia gave his support to the Maori Party, but through a representative today said the people had spoken and he supported the new government to do its work. Jacinda Ardern says the welcome at Tūranga Waiwai was incredible and she felt very welcome.
I think the foundation for our relationship is strong, and the meeting today proved to me that we have so much that we are absolutely jointly focused on working on, and a real intent there to work on that together.
Jacinda Ardern. King Tuheitia said he would like to donate a $3 million plot of land so corrections could provide a more traditional style of housing for Māori prisoners to help with their rehabilitation and integration back into society. Forest and Bird are ditching ANZ, who they say invests millions into fossil fuel. The conservation organisation asked ANZ for a fossil fuel divestment plan in 2016, but says they weren't satisfied with the response. Forest and Bird climate advocate Adelia Hallett says fossil fuel divestment is becoming more common and makes economic sense.
Even if you're not worried about climate change, what you should be worried about is stranded assets. If your superannuation has been invested in fossil fuels, they are very quickly going to become stranded assets, and your investment will become certainly hugely devalued, if not worthless.
Adelia Hallett says they'll be shifting several $1 million of assets through to Kiwibank from May this year. Northland Police have launched a search for a woman who hasn't been seen for almost 2 months. Kaitaia woman Traziza Ehrlich was last seen hitchhiking from Awanui to the far north. The 45-year-old was wearing a bright yellow jacket and 3/4 black pants at the time. Police say given the amount of time she's been missing, they're worried about her safety and well-being. It's 6:05. Sport. The fallout from the Australian cricket team's ball tampering scandal is costing Cricket Australia dearly. Investment firm Magellan has torn up its naming rights sponsorship deal for domestic test series with Cricket Australia as player sponsors also jumped ship in the wake of the fiasco. Here's our sports editor Stephen Hewson.
Magellan only signed on with the Cricket Australia in August last year. It says the conspiracy in the South African Test Series was so inconsistent with its values, it had to end its 3-year deal, reportedly worth $20 million. In addition, athletics company ASICS has said it couldn't tolerate the decisions and actions of David Warner and Cameron Bancroft and has terminated their personal sponsorships. Warner's also lost his sponsorship with electronics company LG, while Captain Steve Smith's been sacked by cereal maker Sanitarium as its promoter of Weet-Bix. The pair have also lost their IPL 2020 contracts worth $2.5 million. This is Stephen Hewson.
The All Black swinger Rieko Ioane will move to second 5 for the Blues in their Super Rugby game against the South African side, the Sharks, at Eden Park on Saturday. With Sonny Bill Williams out injured, Ioane moves to the midfield alongside George Moala. The British tennis player Andy Murray has returned to the court for the first time since having hip surgery in January. The former world #1 hasn't played a competitive match since he was knocked out of Wimbledon last July, but is back training, having now slipped to 29th in the world. That's the news.
This week, some Aussies got caught cheating at cricket.
You have to be living in Australia to realise the full gale force, the tsunami force of the protest. I've never seen anything like it.
And while it was really none of our business, it felt like there was nothing else in the news at the time.
It's everything that Australian sport is about. You are grubs.
On Media Watch, we look at that and top-level turbulence at RNZ and the Beehive this past week. That's Media Watch, after 9 on Sunday morning with Wallace Chapman on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Fine spells and a few showers easing tomorrow. Waikato to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Occasional rain clearing Taranaki this afternoon and elsewhere overnight. Mostly sunny tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay fine at first. Occasional rain developing this evening. Clearing and becoming fine again tomorrow morning. Whanganui to Wellington also Wairarapa. Fine and cloudy periods. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury fine or becoming fine this afternoon. Otago and Southland fine with high cloud thickening tomorrow. Bulla and Westland mainly fine, a few showers spreading north from tomorrow afternoon. Fiordland, a few showers turning to periods of rain tomorrow, and the Chatham Islands cloudy periods with the odd shower tomorrow. It's coming up to 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
You working Easter?
I am. I'm working tomorrow morning and Monday morning.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy the 2 days you're having. Enjoy the Saturday and...
I will.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm just doing my normal week.
Yeah, you are, aren't you? Thanks, Katrina. And thanks everyone for being with us. We're going to return now to the country's district health boards. Last night, Checkpoint identified $4.3 billion of capital expenditure being sought by just 3 of the country's 20 DHBs, all 3 of whom say it won't add beds or increase capacity. This is catch-up spending. We've been talking about this, and at Middlemore it involves getting staff and patients out of buildings that are rotting, mouldy, contain asbestos and are earthquake risks. We've also spoken this week to DHB CEOs and senior insiders who've told us of the pressure, relentless one of them said, on them to deliver operating surpluses and to not advance business cases for money for capital development. Well, today the Health Minister met the chair of the Counties Manukau DHB to discuss the condition of its buildings and its books. And while the DHB assured the Minister there is no risk to public health and safety from the buildings, the cost of repairs and remediation and how long it will all take are uncertain. We're returning now to our interview with David Clark that dropped out earlier in the program. The Minister and this government had pledged an $8 billion increase over 4 years in Vote Health, and I put it to the Minister that $8 billion won't be enough.
No, that is not going to be enough, John. Absolutely right. I'm aware, and these are ropey numbers, so please take them in that context, but the best numbers we have at this stage are that it might be as much as $14 billion over the next 10 years that is required in infrastructure spending. That is no small sum. I don't think anybody would say
$14 billion over 10 years.
Yeah, and of course I want a better picture of that, and so I am requesting that a national asset management plan be set up. I think one of the most shocking things to me is to discover as Minister that there is no asset management plan in place for the New Zealand health system. Now, I think most small business people in New Zealand who had a business with a turnover of $1 million or $2 million or $10 million would have an asset management plan in place. At least they'd know where their assets are or what they are.
Absolutely.
In the health system, I'm afraid for political reasons or other reasons, historically that hasn't been true. And so I am going to request that work be done so that we can have a plan for asset management into the future. And I think it's a responsible thing to do. I think it's actually quite shocking that that hasn't been done previously.
Let's talk about that figure, $14 billion in 10 years, which is an extraordinarily large sum of money. And what we're hearing, what David Mates told us from the Canterbury DHB last night, what the Auckland DHB has told us, the Auckland DHB need about $980 million. And that's just one DHB. The Canterbury DHB, I think from memory, what was it, $1.6, $1.8 billion? And they're running to stand still. Canterbury is spending all that money and not getting any extra beds.
Yeah, John, I think they are large numbers and they are ropey numbers. So let's be clear on that. That's why we need some really solid work done around what the actual costs are likely to be and how to sequence them so that we can sort out associated workforce issues in the construction industry so that we can have a pipeline of projects for infrastructure replacement. These are critical to New Zealand's future, these projects. They are about making sure we have a health system that delivers services to the public in a reliable way that New Zealanders would expect and deserve. They are a priority. So that's why I think that piece of work, actually quantifying the costs and the timeframes, is critical and will need to be done carefully and in a considered fashion. It won't be an overnight exercise. The health system is huge, and I would be surprised, actually, from what I've heard so far, if we even know where all those buildings are.
No, absolutely.
And so it's a big task.
It is a big task. Do you have the money?
John, at the moment, we'll deal with what's in front of us, and I think DHBs, will be frustrated they can't do everything at once, but they will also acknowledge that this government will be getting on with some of that stuff that has been a backlog for some time.
Why is there such a backlog? And the backlog has been so clearly signalled. I'm sitting in the Checkpoint studio with a table full of documents of DHB, even Treasury memos declaring, Treasury, quote, some DHBs look to be sweating their assets and underfunding repairs and maintenance to help balance their books. The Counties Manukau DHB saying to their minister and their ministry in 2016, increasingly tough decisions have been made and will continue to be made, and there was pressure on them to make surpluses while they were making those decisions. What has been going on?
Well, in one sense, it's not mine to explain the actions of the previous government, but what I will say is that there is in a broad way, there's a political debate, a public debate about whether government should be delivering healthcare. In the Labour Party and I believe across this coalition government, we believe there is a need for strong public delivery of health services. The international evidence says strongly delivered public health services mean better population health outcomes, and we believe that to be true. Now, the previous government seemed to believe that by squeezing the health sector you'd promote a private health industry. They were concerned about private profit for that health industry so it could grow, and one way of achieving that would be by squeezing the public delivery of health services. That's not our philosophy, so we will start to address that backlog. I've inherited the problem, but I'm determined to deal with that and lay out a path over time to make sure we rebuild the public capability in our health sector, because New Zealand needs it.
Minister, I just want to talk about the kind of advice you're getting as a new minister, and I'm looking at your advisory group, and it contains names like Karen Patasi, who everyone who knows anything about health in New Zealand will be familiar with, Lester Levy, who was the chair of 3 DHBs in Auckland. In other words, these are people who have very much been part of the health establishment. And I wonder if you are going to get the kind of reinvention advice you need.
The advisors on that group are there to give me confidence that the ministry is in a state where it can ensure it's got good oversight and monitoring and leadership in the health sector. I don't think anyone would question that Mr Levy was a strong influence in Auckland. In that sense, he brings that to the table. He has some strong financial skills. It's also true that I want to have another look at Auckland, and Dr Levy tendered his resignation of all 3 chairs, and I have accepted that, and I intend to make sure that we have strong leadership in Auckland into the future, so that we do have a clear picture of what needs to be done to rebuild the health system in that part of the country, as I do have an expectation that we'll have a strong picture of what needs to be done across the country.
I've spoken to 2 people who are very senior in DHBs this week. One of them used the word crisis on the record, and one of them used the word crisis off the record. In other words, they didn't want me to say who they were. Do you believe there is a form of crisis in the health system relating to the money that is required to simply catch up with the capital expenditure that has been deferred and delayed and underfunded, and also a crisis of confidence in the health system because of a relationship that was increasingly not constructive between the ministry and the DHBs?
Yeah, I think I've got to be careful here. I think it's easy to blame the Ministry of Health. Actually, the political leadership in the last government was such that the desire was to squeeze the health sector. It was to make sure that staff salaries didn't grow at all, if possible, to make sure that assets were sweated. That's a particular view of the world, and it's aimed at growing the private health sector as a priority rather than ensuring the public delivery of services to New Zealanders. I don't share that philosophy. We have a huge challenge ahead of us as a consequence. We have staff who have been stretched for a very long time, continue to provide amazing service to the public. Every day I hear stories of the amazing experiences New Zealanders have in our health system. No thanks to the previous government, in my view. Those staff continued to do their jobs amazingly well in very stretched circumstances. We have rundown buildings, and we know that we need to address those challenges budget by budget by budget to work our way through them so that we can rebuild the health sector that New Zealanders deserve.
Right, one final question, and we've talked about this figure before, the additional $8 billion over 4 years. Are you going to increase that?
Look, at this stage, that's the pledge we've made. It's the biggest pledge that I think any political party made during the election. We intend to honour it. But you said previously in this interview it won't be enough. I have said that that amount of money will start to rebuild the health system. We've got nearly a decade of neglect. You can't fix that all in one budget. I doubt we'll be able to fix it all in one term.
The Health Minister talking to us earlier this afternoon. The last leg of the deal to stage the America's Cup in Auckland has been clinched. Auckland councillors have voted unanimously to stump up nearly half of the $212 million of public money needed to host and help run the regatta in 2021. Construction of the new plan, which involves fewer wharf extensions than were initially mooted, could start late this year. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Nile reports.
I can tell you what's kept us awake for the last few nights is getting to this table.
Team New Zealand director Tina Simmons, when asked what she saw as their biggest risk, getting majority council support for the ratepayers' almost $100 million share in the America's Cup event was never a certainty, but Ms Simmons needn't have worried. Travel, illness and just no-shows meant a third of councillors were absent from today's meeting. 3 of those who turned up remained silent, and when the Mayor Phil Goff put it to the vote,
I'll declare that carried unanimously. Thank you very much.
Councillors spent an hour behind closed doors having the small print of the deal spelled out before the vote. This includes the $13.5 million of revenue lost by moving Team New Zealand into the Viaduct Events Centre, rent-free for 3.5 years. Politicians from the west and south of the city, such as Ross Clow from the Faux ward, asked for assurances that the benefits would reach their communities.
They're wondering whether it's the thing we should be doing with our money, but if you can somehow reach out to the south and the west especially, because obviously the inner city and the North Shore do get the benefit anyway because of just the accessibility and viewing they have, but that would be good, and make this, because you've got New Zealand behind you, let's just get all of Auckland behind you.
Team New Zealand's Chief Operating Officer Kevin Shoebridge told councillors the job spin-offs included not only the $20 million worth of spending on race boats, but 30 locally built chase boats needed to support the event.
Building the support boats, building masts, etc., that will include people in South Auckland, because that's where those boats will be built, where some of those facilities are. So I think there will be involvement.
The Mayor, Phil Goff, is way ahead of the team, talking not only of the benefits from the 2021 defence, but the regatta after that.
If you win the Cup again, and we're defending the Cup again, we get all the benefits of the America's Cup with minimal extra investment in capital facilities. And that's really important.
Kevin Shoebridge brought some perspective when asked what risk was keeping him awake at night.
Well, losing, be number one.
The village plans leave the negotiation table now and head to the Environment Court, where it's hoped approval will be granted late this year to begin construction of up to 7 team bases. Tonight, Team New Zealand will unveil the fine print of the design of the radical foiling monohulls which will contest the Cup. I tamaki makoro mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Todd Nile tēnei.
From Auckland's waterfront to Dunedin's Forsyth Bar Stadium, where about 37,000 people are expected to cram in tonight to mark the beginning of what is expected to be the biggest event or series of events in the city since the 2011 Rugby World Cup. Ed Sheeran is there. This is through. Will delight those of you. Well, there's a couple of miserable buggers who've texted in and said too much Ed Sheeran. We don't do much music on Checkpoint. I'm very partial to music. We hardly ever do it. So just suck it up. Our Otago Southern reporter Timothy Brown and Ian Telfer have been tracking the spread of Ed fever.
That's the sound of 1,100 ukulele-playing children singing Ed Sheeran's hit song Photograph. Dunedin is bursting at the seams as visitors and residents alike pour into the central city ahead of the first of 3 concerts. Like a modern-day Beatlemania, Ed fever has infected the masses.
It's just been fantastic being down here today and the entertainment, and to see so many children playing their ukulele.
Yeah, we've never had nothing like this. Yeah, so we're all happy for Ed.
Are you excited about it? Yeah, it should be
So
good.
excited.
Exactly.
We booked it so long ago though. When did we book it? Like a year ago, over a year ago. Yeah, been a long time coming.
Hundreds lined the octagon in hope of catching a glimpse of the red-headed Englishman. But while anyone walking by wearing a baseball cap or with red hair turned heads, unfortunately for the kids and the crowd, Ed Sheeran didn't show.
All this for Ed Sheeran?
Yeah, and he didn't show up. But
bit disappointing?
yeah, well, it was, but I think he would have saw this. I think his personal photographers were out and about maybe. Hopefully he shows up. We're going to wait around for that.
The anticipation of Sheeran's presence is palpable and only growing in the hours before the concert. Even Dunedin Mayor Dave Cull has been swept up in it.
It was a great vibe. I've just been out in the lower octagon and round to Bath Street to the mural, and things are really building up. There's a wonderful positive atmosphere, more and more visitors coming in, and they are clearly delighted.
Dave Cull is going along to tonight's concert, but the real die-hard fans have already gathered at the gates of the stadium, some as early as 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, and some from overseas.
I'm from Australia, so Sydney, Australia. Came over for the shows. This will be show 16 of this tour for me tonight.
That was Jasmine McLeish, who is marking her 19th birthday by watching tonight's show with her father, her 4th in New Zealand. She says she is excited to watch all 3 of his Dunedin shows over the weekend.
Oh, he's just got really great music, and the fact that he and just a guitar and a loop pedal can bring so many people into one place just blows my mind, and it's really great to watch every night. Yeah.
Jasmine McLeish says Sheeran's shows never get old.
It is quite similar every night, but I don't think I'd ever get tired of seeing it. He's so great live, so good.
But she was only one of dozens of fans to have camped at the gates of Forsyth Bar Stadium by 10 a.m. this morning. And some, like friends Jermaine Surhoy, Jackie Griffin and Zara Robertson, weren't as innocent in their intentions for camping out so early.
We're going to lose our voices. Yeah. I was going to say something else, but... Hey, Jackie.
You can say whatever you like.
But she's not the one wearing 2 bras.
All precautions against Ed fever are necessary, even 2 bras. Ostensibly not so one can be hurled in Sheeran's direction. At least that's what Jermaine Surhoy tells me.
God, it helps with the bouncing when you jump off and down.
As Sheeran takes the stage about 9 p.m. tonight, Dunedin may just boil over. But the hitmaker will certainly feel welcome. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Wait for me to come home.
Timothy Brown, every time I say the B word, rhymes with chugger or lugger. Heather, you are wonderful. Texts in and says, John, stop swearing, please. I say other words too that Heather doesn't like. And what I can say, Heather, is you don't like swearing, but you do like Checkpoint because you're constantly there monitoring my swearing. And if you had a swear jar, I'd make you a wealthy man. So we do appreciate you listening, and I'll try to keep an eye on my language. But I don't think that the B word is particularly offensive. But we'll agree to differ on that. But thanks for listening, Heather. There's going to be a Tūhoe takeover of Rotorua this weekend as the biennial Tūhoe Ahorea festival hits town. More than 15,000 people are expected to enjoy kapahaka, sports debates and more at the 3-day event. For almost 50 years, the festival has been held within the Tūhoe region in the heartland of Te Urewera. But this Easter weekend, it returns to Rotorua, where it was first held in 1974. And Te Mana Korahi reporter and our mate, John Boynton, is there.
A handful of kaimahi or workers showed up bright and early today to help with the ahure set up at the Rotorua International Stadium. They took a quick break frying up sausages for their morning kai. Rob Kemp is the site coordinator for the ahure and says it's been special working at the event for the first time.
My koro died when my mum was young. We grew up not really knowing our whānau from the hills, so it's just been in my adult life that I've made a few connections and managed to keep in touch with some cousins.
He grew up in Gisborne and lost connection to his whānau who come from the Te Urewera settlement of Ruatahuna. Despite still learning about his Tūhoe background, he knows the strong reputation the iwi holds.
Always been staunch to who they are. That's something I'm really proud of being able to put my name next to. Yeah, I suppose just being staunch and proud.
The ahure was first held at Mātātua Marae in Rotorua, but kapahaka teams will walk onto a stage similar to the one used at the National Te Matatini Kapahaka competition. And Rob Kemp says the stage is set for a memorable weekend. Looks like it could be the Flashes one, yeah, it's normally pretty grassroots.
Yeah, hopefully. I don't know if it's the flashness of it is what we're after. I just want to make it a good event for everyone coming.
Chair of the Manatū Ahurea o Tūhoe, Pau Temara, says Tūhoe leaders such as John Rangihau set up the ahure for those who moved away from the homelands.
The ahure started in Rotorua in 1974, and way down the track, 2018, we're coming back to Rotorua, almost as if it's coming back to its beginning, coming back to its Hawaii-kitanga.
But over the years, the ahure has allowed them to come together to play sports, sing, debate and strengthen their Tūhoe identity.
It binds them back to Tūhoe with a very Tūhoe concept of mate mate aone, and that is unity that's woven into the land from where we trace our whakapapa to.
Tūhoe now finds itself in the post-Treaty of Waitangi settlement phase, and Pau Temara expects the kapahaka stage to be alight with bold political statements.
We sang about those things, we composed hakas about pre-settlement, and no doubt we will compose waiata, haka, poi about post-settlement.
For Te Area Fofo, the ahurei is all about the iwi coming back to celebrate their tūhoetana.
It's good that they're able to come back to a place where they can feel comfortable, where they can feel at home, which brings us to that kōrero te kai tō mai a tūhoi, which was the slogan for the Hui Ahurei in 2016. And it's just to bring together our iwi of tūhoi and remain strong.
Te Area Fofo will be performing for the group Hine Matarua Morua Tāhuna in the senior kapahaka competition. He says his Ropu's performances will be a tribute to those leaders who set up the ahurei.
It's looking to the ones who have built the foundation of the tūhoi ahurei for us and everything they've left behind. That's just a little bit of what we have to offer.
The ahurei kicks off tomorrow with the start of the junior kapahaka competition. I rotorua mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton aho.
We're coming up to the end of the week. It's Thursday, but of course it's Easter weekend. Thank you for being with us. We hope you have a wonderful Easter weekend, particularly those of you who are getting all 4 days off. On behalf of our really excellent and hard-working team, executive producer Pip Keane, Catherine Wallbridge, Bridget Burke, Michelle Cook, Zach Fleming, Kelvin Samuel, Blegg Stagpool and Nick Monroe, our cameraman. Thank you for having been with us this week. We really appreciate the privilege and pleasure of your company. Some excellent suggestions from people, including Mike Reeves. You are a very naughty boy, coming in about the words they would like me to say. It'll be the year 3068 before I'm saying that on the wireless mic. Have a great weekend.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government has closed the door on any Russians expelled by other countries following the Salisbury nerve agent attack. Forest and Bird is ditching ANZ, who it says invests millions into fossil fuels. Northland Police say they're worried for the safety of a woman who hasn't been seen for almost 2 months. And the letting agent Quinovic is defending trying to charge some Wellington tenants a massive letting fee, despite a court ordering them to give the money back. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Dateline Pacific, covering the major Pacific stories of the day. In Fiji,
they proceeded to torture these men by punching them, kicking them, slapping them.
And in Kiribati,
he was aware that no passengers allowed on board. Weather at that time was not good. It was rough weather.
Dateline Pacific, now at 8:15 every weeknight on RNZ National.